Well, and
Um,
I think there's a problem here, Mark, which is it's really easy for us to say something like, God, I wish we had more than two parties. And I agree with you that there's more, in the lower left in our culture, I think there's more people sort of looking for other systems, right? Other ways of doing this that are different than the ways we've been doing it for the last 250 years. And I think one of the real limitations here is that the two-party system is not a result of like political choice. This isn't just because we're all brainwashed into thinking there can only be two systems, for example. The reason we have a two-party system is because it's literally the structure of society itself. In other words, in the lower right quadrant, we have a system called first past the post voting. This method of voting forces a two-party system into being.
hmm.
There's no other, again, it's inevitable. There's no other choice here. If you have a first past the post system, that means all the spoils go to the winner, right? And there's only one winner. And that creates
Yeah, so you're talking about like ranked choice voting.
this is so when it comes to prescriptions for actually fixing this, yeah, they're lower right, they're not lower left. It's not a matter of like, oh, we just need a green party, oh, we need a patriot party, oh, we need all these different, we can say that all we want, but until we actually change
Yeah,
the
we have to change the
mechanism.
system. Yeah.
Yeah. And that the irony here is that system is probably only going to change from one or two directions. Either A, progressives get voted into office and then they change their own systems to ranked choice voting. It's not something establishment Democrats are very interested in. It's certainly not something establishment Republicans are very interested in. Or B, conservatives continue to lose on the national level just because of how things are unfolding, but are able to find sort of pockets of power on the local level and are then, in order to make themselves more viable, push something like ranked choice voting through. I think that's another possible direction it could come in. But as of now, ranked choice is really only supported by progressives and by independents.
I think
Um,
it's happening in Maine.
yeah, it did happen to Maine. I was sad that it got voted down in Massachusetts. I'm like, Massachusetts is a perfect laboratory for this kind of experiment. I really like the Republicans that come out of Massachusetts,
Yeah.
Romney being one of them. Um, it's so I was really sad that ranked choice voting didn't pass there. So that's one of my three
Well, and,
legs.
and it really Massachusetts is it's a Democratic dominated state. Like the only time the Republicans win is governor.
Yep.
But the spectrum of perspectives within that Democratic Party is very, very different.
Yep.
And so I think that it would lend itself well to ranked choice voting.
Yeah. Totally.
So
The others, yeah, just real quick, because this is leg
yeah,
one of my three legs to fix democracy, and I want your opinion here. So one is ranked choice voting. This is how we get out of the two-party system and towards something more parliamentarian, which I think everybody wants. Number two is we need to repeal the 1929 Reapportionment Act, which puts an artificial cap on the number of representatives in the House. And what this ends up doing is it completely skews
yeah,
representation, where some representatives represent like 5 times as many people as other representatives. Now, this is
sure.
not how the House was originally designed. The House was originally designed to be proportional. So what we need to do is get rid of the 1929 Reapportionment Act, which put an artificial cap in the number of representatives that you can have in the House,
Yeah,
right?
I agree with that.
Institute something like the Wyoming rule, which says the state with the lowest population becomes the basic sort of unit for distributing representatives. And now all of a sudden we have a much more equitable House that,
Which is Wyoming, I think, actually.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
small
exactly.
population
Yeah,
state.
yeah, that's why it's the Wyoming rule.
Yeah.
And it's funny because this would benefit some conservative states. It would benefit some liberal states. But the idea here is that we don't actually have fair representation in the House right now as it was designed. The Senate was designed to be sort of the elite of the elites, right? You have two per
Yeah.
state, and but the House is supposed to be a reflection of the society that elects them. And I think that we need to repeal the 1929 Reapportionment Act in order to get that more balanced. Number three, my big progressive idea: reinstate the draft. but which sounds more conservative than progressive, but convert it into a National Guard Peace Corps like service where we take rich kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids, etc., put them all together in service of something greater than themselves. The irony here is that it helps shore up our conservatism in the short term, giving us a healthy sense of patriotism, nationalism, etc., while also creating more progressives in the long run, simply by getting people out of their hometowns, exposing them to different ways of thinking, being, doing, etc., which we all know is one of the biggest accelerants of development out there. Just be around people who think differently than you do. So that's my 3-point plan to fix this country. How many of those things do you think the Biden administration is likely to do?
Probably not ranked choice. They certainly would consider the Wyoming rule.
It'd be in their
Uh,
short-term benefit to do so.
and it would, the third one I think is, I support that idea. I would tease it out a little bit because if we go back to the QAnon and just what 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 we have with the QAnon situation or with a Republican Party that is seeing the world that way is that we have an epistemological crisis, right? That we are not making meaning the same way, right? And so that's a problem. It's also, related to that is that it's not only that we're not making meaning that way, but like it's kind of obvious that our republic in certain ways is in decay because our lack of civic understanding, our lack of appreciation of civics in general. And so I think part of what you're getting at is a revitalization of civics, of our civic responsibility to the other, to community, to something greater than ourselves, to our government. I mean, we don't emphasize, actually, we don't emphasize civics in our public educational system. Just as an example, I was telling a friend who might even be listening right now that I looked at my high school just because I couldn't look at the curriculums. I'm on the school board for my local town, and so I was looking at the high school in terms of like their curriculum, and all I could look at was the departments, like the science department had over 10 teachers, English department over 10, the math department had, 9, 10. Social studies, three.
Yeah.
My daughter got 10 minutes on Dr. King the other day in third grade. And so just as an example of that de-emphasis on our civic process, of our civic understanding. And when you don't get that right, you don't hold your government accountable, and then the government doesn't hold the market accountable,
Right.
right? And because the market is there's this kind of like cyclic process where the market feeds the government and the government feeds the market, and that's what Biden's ethics rules are trying to pull back on. But if you don't have a society that can hold the government accountable to hold the market accountable, you're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And so, I see that as a major, major crisis. And it goes to the lack of epistemological understanding. And so, having something like a 1 year, 2 year post high school experience where I think I gain a deeper civic understanding of how state, local government, uh, national, international, how corporations work. Multinational corporations are like their own governance
Mm-hmm.
structures. Like gaining that level of deep sophistication and understanding, gaining the so I gain the systemic understanding. So lower left, lower right, uh, and then I get for the lower left, I gain the cultural community of we at the same time, where I'm giving to something greater than myself. I'm building bonds and starting to recognize that we are more than my ethnocentric community and tribe, that we are something quite larger than that. And so those are some of the things that I see as are necessary to kind of get us to the next level. And actually, we're going to go into speech now, I think, a little bit on free speech
Yep.
as we go into cancel culture.
Yep.
And there's some ideas I have there too. So I
Good.
will stop and
Well,
see
I'll,
if
I'll
you have
make the
anything to
segue.
say.
I'm gonna pinch off this conversation by quoting a former president who was actually capable of 7-syllable words,
No
which
way.
seems like a luxury these days. Here's what Obama said recently: "If we do not have the capacity to distinguish what's true from what's false, then by definition, the marketplace of ideas doesn't work. And by definition, our democracy doesn't work. We are entering into an epistemological crisis."
That's from the Atlantic.
Yep. How cool to have a president who knows words like epistemological. And
I
now we've
know.
got a president who's like quoting Kierkegaard.
I know.
Holy shit. So
I
yeah,
know.
let's
Reading his book made me, I'm a decent reader, but I was inspired to,
when he actually writes
turn
it,
off the
which
boob
is
tube and get after
yeah,
it.
that's kind of what's cool about Obama, is that he actually writes his own shit, which I think is
Totally. And
pretty
he
cool.
writes it on a yellow pad.
Mm.
He doesn't type it, which is really interesting.
So let's do this, Mark. Let's make a transition. So we just spent lots of time shitting on some of the more extreme voices coming from the right. Now let's do our due diligence and equally shit on the extremist voices coming from the left.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about this phenomenon called cancel culture. Now,